so that we can discuss these things together, so that people can say, okay, well, whether anybody likes to believe it or not, that these things are happening. But from a certain standpoint of intuitiveness, and that's one of those things where we all know that feeling, where your gut reaction or your natural reaction is to do something, and then you sort of overthink it, and then you say, okay, well, if I'm using my intellect, that's where I think we have a big problem with intuition versus and two things that we all fight. However, we all kind of know that for whatever reason, that if we would have followed our gut in that moment, that we wouldn't have done what we did. But we overthought it. Okay, so let me see here. I think we've got another caller here on the line. Hello, caller, you there? Caller? Hello?
Kevin?
Yes. Are you there?
Kevin? Can you hear me, Kevin?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Grey Wolf. I took you up to the nursery and
Oh, okay. All right.
Up Samara with the Sasquatch people.
Yes. Hello, Grey Wolf. How are you today?
No, I'm doing okay.
Do you have a question for Richter?
No, I was wanting to discuss a little bit more of the mind speak and the cloaking because I've had a lot of experience in it. I have.
Right. Well, why don't you explain from your standpoint how that works for you? And do you feel like what Richter's idea is that sometimes sometimes that Bigfoot can violate your space, your personal space?
Yes, it was a violation. Of course it was a violation because when they first came into my mind at Kwani's cabin so long ago, they didn't ask. They just did it.
Yeah.
So in a way, yes, it was a violation. He is correct. It was almost like a mental rape, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the experience was amazing because I've never experienced that. But what I was going through in my thought pattern was that the fact that we as humans have been conditioned by society that if you hear voices in your mind, you're crazy.
And sometimes that's valid.
And these were voices in my mind.
Yeah. So this voice in your mind, Grey Wolf, whenever it came into it, could you tell it wasn't you? In other words, how did you know it was an outside source? Yeah.
Well, I was sitting on the couch. I felt this energy come in that was amazingly intense. And then I heard this voice that said, "My name is Aileen, and I am one of Kwani's protectors." So I started explaining to Kwani what was going on, and Kwani started writing it down. But that wasn't the most intense part. The intense part was when the ancient came in, and I believe that he entered into Elaine's mind, and I heard him through Elaine's mind. So it was, and that energy almost made me pass out because it was so intense. So it wasn't my thoughts. I don't feel energy like that when I think. This was outside voices that came in.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke with these two for 15 years. They were in my mind at all times, day and night. They were there. Now, I spoke for many years on a talk show that Steve Abney did called Stone Graphics on Blog Talk Radio, and there may still be archives on it. But they were talking in my mind while I was on the talk show, and they were answering questions that people were asking me.
Right. And so what was the information that you heard as far as was that stuff that you was just unknown to you. I mean, I think that, here's the problem, Grey Wolf. I know that you experience things that other people don't. I know you well. We're not like best buddies, but we hang out maybe once or twice a year at different conferences, and we know each other in that sense. So I've kind of picked up on a uniqueness about you, but to the average person who's listening at home, how would they? And do you care whether you can prove that Bigfoot exists or not? I guess that's kind of the thing that we have to establish first or not. You know that they're real to you, and that other people should know that too. But from a standpoint of an average listener who says, it's a late night on a Sunday. I got to go to work tomorrow. This is entertainment for me. How do they know that this is something that's real? So let's say somebody's sitting in Iowa right now, and they're listening to the show, and they're saying, "Well, what are these people talking about? How do you care that they don't necessarily get what you're talking about, or is that something that you deeply think about?"
I was beat up for many years. Believe me, I understand, and I pulled away from the whole talk show bit and really didn't care anymore because when I was doing this 15 years ago, they thought you were crazy just for seeing Sasquatch. And I was talking about mind speak. And I was talking about cloaking. And I was talking about dimensional shifts. And I was talking about portals. And I was talking about all this stuff. And these people just thought I was totally crazy. Now, I've done a lot of Native American spirituality and spirit guide work. So I hear my spirit guides, and it's nothing like hearing Sasquatch talk in my mind. Talking in your mind, Richter is correct. It's very disturbing. It's not what you would expect it to be. It's an invasion, really, and this was the whole thing that ended sort of my relationship with Kwani, was over the fact that I was discussing with him that they had opened up my third eye enough that I was going to turn this around. Because for so long, they spoke to me, I heard them, they would hear my thoughts, but I would ask them questions and they were vague. Well, when somebody's vague with me, it either means they're holding something back or they're lying to me. So I was having some real issues with these two voices that were in my mind.
Right.
But since they had been opening up my third eye and I've been starting to have a lot of psychic abilities popping up, and of course, they never gave me a manual on how to deal with this. So I had to find out on my own how to deal with shutting down outside voices, because I wasn't just hearing Sasquatch, I was hearing people's thoughts.
Right.
And it was getting very disturbing. It's very hard to deal with when you walk out into a store and you hear what people are thinking.
Yeah.
The best way to put it would be being a Borg on Star Trek and having to hear all the thousands of voices. That's what it felt like. And it got so bad that I decided, and I talked to Kwani about this, was the fact that I was going to turn it around and I was going to enter their mind. And right. Kwani got very upset with me and very mad and pissed off. And that's where our relationship sort of went south, because he didn't want me destroying his relationship with them, right, since it was one of his protectors.
Right. So basically you...
Well, I went and did it.
Yeah. So you...
I went and did it.
Yeah. So you entered into the mind of a Sasquatch, and then so what happened whenever you entered their mind?
Well, when I entered the Sasquatch's mind, when I walked into his mind, the ancient immediately shut the door. I felt the whole slam shut, his voice, his mind exited, and he was gone.
Right.
The problem was that the Sasquatch had been working with me for so long that he couldn't shut his mind off to me.
Right.
So I saw all these things that they had been vague about for all those years.
Yeah. Well,
that's one of the reasons why Kwame didn't want me to speak at the first conference.
Yeah.
And Kelly did, because Kelly wanted me to share my stories.
Right. Well, it sounds like to me, Bigfoot. I was going to call you Bigfoot. Gray Wolf, you know what we need to do?
I love you too, Bigfoot brother.
Yeah. Well, here's what we need to do. We need to get you onto the show a different time, and you can tell us what you saw. How about that? Okay. But I'm going to get back to Richter here.
I can also tell you about some of the experiences with cloaking.
Yeah, we'll do that too. All right, buddy? Well, I'm going to let you go for right now, just simply because of the fact I want to get Richter's take on this now. But thank you for calling up and kind of backing him up on that part. Okay, brother? I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Okay, Richter. So what do you think? I mean, what do you think? Do you think that, if from that standpoint, we're speaking about a person's experience. And
yes,
and so their experience is this, again, this is one of the things where I always say, I know Gray Wolf. He's an interesting guy. I've seen him do things in the woods that is bizarre. He's got Native American training and things like that, and so as a person who has been around that tradition, in some ways I honor that. But I also realize that in a certain standpoint, from a lot of people at home, when they're listening to it, it's all it is a campfire story. You know what I mean? That's all it is. And that's what I have. I mean, I have my sightings of a Bigfoot. I have one picture that my wife took during one of the experiences. That's, a lot of people look at that and say, well, that is something or that isn't something. And then I have a lot of stories about, everything else. So I think people need to sort of differentiate some of the different issues that we have between the two, because again, when I was doing my master's degree in education, was focusing on folklore of beings. And so I took cross-community or cross-cultural differences in folklore and I brought them together. And that's one of the first reasons I started to learn a lot of the stories, Native American stories about Bigfoot and things like that. But from the average Bigfooter out there, who don't really care about any of those stories anyway, because they're coming up with what they want Bigfoot to be. I mean, what's your kind of take on that as far as well, first of all, let's put it to you this way. Do you think that sort of ESP or extrasensory gifts are a possibility, or is that something that you say, well, there's just no basis for that? And because I
believe everything's a possibility to a point.
Yeah.
Things have to function in the real world.
Right.
For example, let's bring it down to, if I were to be like Gray Wolf and suddenly start hearing all these voices of people in a restaurant or at the gas stop, wherever it was he mentioned, I would want to be put away. That would be the most frightening experience. Could you just imagine having some kind of new ability to hear what the fat lady behind the check stand is thinking about you? Oh, here comes this funny looking guy. Or the guy next to you looking at the cigarettes. Which Marlboro should I buy? Could you imagine? That would be horrific.
Yeah.
In every way possible, because it's not normal. Could that have happened to this gentleman? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not him, but I know how I would react.
Yeah.
I would be put in the loony bin. I'd be in Bellevue in a straitjacket. I'd be crying. I'd be screaming. I would be like, get these voices out of my head.
Yeah.
In fact, Kevin, if I were to experience one of these woo, quote-unquote woo experiences of Sasquatch, if I were to truly experience mind speak or cloaking or zapping or transforming into balls of energy, whatever.
Yeah.
If I were to witness something like that, no question witness it.
Yeah.
I would be